بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله وصلى الله وسلم على سيدنا محمد ومن والاه. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to our explanation of the waraqat of Imam al-Juwayni rahimahullahu ta'ala. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala yazidna wa iyyakum. Ask Allah to increase us and increase you in khair. Talking now about the definition of Usul al-Fiqh. He's going to start the book with that. Why? Because you'll recall last time I said, man, the whole purpose of these small books is to introduce ideas to definitions. And scholars typically say that the key to what's called tasawwur, tasawwur with ta. See if I can put it here in English for you. I'm using a mouse. Tasawwur, which means your ability to imagine a subject, to conceptualize a subject. Scholars noted that there are ways to accomplish this, and the most efficient way is through definitions, what are called had, with two D's, had yani ha and dal, or ta'rif. So we're going to start with the definition of usul al-fiqh in that vein. So Imam al-Haramain, he says, opening up his text, the first sentence in the book itself, هذه ورقات تشتمل على معرفة فصول من علم أصول الفقه. Here he says papers or pages, hence the name of it's called ورقات. يعني هذه ورقات. So it took the name because he started the book with that. But what he says here in this first sentence is these few pages contain knowledge of chapters from the principles of Usul al-Fiqh. Not all the knowledge, but some of the knowledge, some of the most important things that's needed at a fundamental functional level. Okay? Let's talk about the objectives for today's class. Understand the concept. So you want to understand Usul al-Fiqh. To comprehend the fundamental concept of Usul al-Fiqh, you're able to imagine it and what it does and its role in jurisprudence. Number two, there are two ways that scholars define things sometimes, and I want you to be able to distinguish between those two ways. The first is what's called a compound definition as a phrase, two words brought together, and then as a technical definition, as a discipline. So the first is going to be like usul, fiqh. These two words, when they're brought together, what does it mean? The other definition, the technical definition, is going to be usul al-fiqh as a science. It's like computer programming. If you took computer and defined it, programming and defined it, and then you brought them together, that would be the compound method. Then if you understood computer programming to be one word, talking about a discipline, a technical definition, that's the second way. So I need you to remember this, that there's two things happening here when we're talking about the definition of usul al-fiqh, because it's made up of two words, usul al-fiqh. One method is a compound definition. This was the way of the early scholars. The second way is as a technical term. We don't need to unpack what usul means, what fiqh means. Listen, it's just a science, usul al-fiqh. That's a technical definition, and that's the definition adopted by later scholars. Alas, appreciate the importance to recognize and value the critical role that usul al-fiqh plays in deriving Islamic legal rulings from primary sources. These objectives will guide our exploration of how scholars derive Islamic rulings using systematic methodological principles. I have a problem with this right here, because although this is true, where are you in this definition? Where are you in this statement? So not only is it going to guide our exploration of how scholars derive Islamic rulings, it's also going to equip us with the potential skill set needed if we are ever called upon for educational service. The introduction, Imam al-Haramain begins his text, waraqat, by defining usul al-fiqh. First, as a compound term, by defining both components of that term, and later as a technical discipline. This lesson combines both approaches to facilitate for you an understanding, also to avoid repetition. So once again, he says, these are pages, hadihi waraqat, that include knowledge of chapters from the principles of jurisprudence, which is composed of two separate parts. When he says which is composed of two separate parts, he's talking about how do we define principles of jurisprudence, yani? And you can see it. It's in the English right there in front of you, right? He says principles, usul, fiqh. You speak Arabic, you know what this is. Mudafa, idafa, mudafun ilayhi, yani. Usul fiqh. So here, two separate parts, meaning two separate words. Usul fiqh. So he's alluding to his approach now is going to be define it as a compound word, compound definition. Let's go back to some of the things we talked about in previous classes. What is asl? Remember that tree? The concept or foundation or root, something which other things are built on. ما يبنى عليه غيره. Scholars say what other things are based on. What is fiqh? The understanding of Islamic legal rulings derived through scholarly effort. That's as it is defined by Imam al-Haramain in this text. So he defines asl. This is actually from his text, right? But we're presenting it this way to you. What is asl? The concept or foundation or root for which other things are built. What is fiqh? Ma'rifah is understanding or having knowledge of Islamic legal rulings. Allati turiquha al-ijtihad, he says in the Arabic text, who are derived from scholarly effort. So that means there's going to be some differences. This is not going to be as intense as 100% agreed upon dogma, because these outcomes are rooted in scholarship, in human effort, and human effort is certainly fallible. What is usul al-fiqh? The methodology and principles used to derive Islamic legal rulings from their sources. I'm going to build on that in a second, but what he's doing now is defining al-asl, fiqh, usul al-fiqh, to show you the relationship. So when we talk about usul al-fiqh, we want to think about it in three ways. Number one, what constitutes an eligible evidence? Number two, how to use the evidence. Number three, what are the qualifications to engage that science? معرفة الدلائل الفقه إجمالا وكيفية الاستفادة منها وحال المستفيد. This definition is from al-Baydawi in the Minhaj. It's an important text in Usul al-Fiqh, one of the intermediate texts. That Usul al-Fiqh is معرفة الدلائل الفقه إجمالا, to have a general knowledge of what is and is not an admissible Sharia evidence. Quran, Sunnah, Ijma' and Qiyas are agreed upon. But can I say someone said, or I saw a meme, or some dude put on TikTok, or those aren't evidences. كيفية الاستفادة منها, how do you use the evidences? Everyone can quote stuff, but they don't know how to use it. Ahlul Bid'ah, they have evidences, they don't know how to use them. And finally, what are the qualifications needed? So that's why it's called, if you look here very carefully and pay attention to this here, it's not called aslu fiqh. It's a plural, usul. That's why that question mark's there. So the foundations of fiqh, meaning those three things. معرفة دلائل الفقه, كيفية الاستفادة منها, حال المستفيد. What's an evidence? How to use the evidence? What are the qualifications or prerequisites needed to engage the subject? So that's why it's called usul, not aslu. The plural, usul, jam'u taksir, yani foundations of fiqh. Understanding these foundational concepts is essential before delving into the detailed principles of usul al-fiqh. That's why we spent a lot of time on it. So let's look at usul al-fiqh as a compound term. But you know what? Let's stop here. We'll pick that up in the next lesson. I don't want to take too long, but next time we'll begin looking at usul al-fiqh as a compound term and then as a scientific term. Barakallahu feekum wa sallallahu wa sallam ala Sayyidina Muhammad. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi.